Welcome to Tech with Kaushik. This is part 7 of our complete practice question series for the SC-100 Microsoft Cybersecurity Architect Expert exam. Choose your answer before the timer ends. Then review the correct answer, explanation, and exam tip. Let us begin part 7. Question number 231. Scenario. A company integrates Microsoft Defender for endpoint risk signals with Microsoft Intune compliance and uses conditional access to require compliant devices. Several endpoints are blocked after malware is detected. The malware is removed and Defender for endpoint lowers the device risk. Which two conditions must occur before users on the remediated devices regain access to protected applications? Select 2. The available options are as follows. Option A. Microsoft Intune must re-evaluate and mark the devices as compliant. Option B. A new conditional access policy must be created for the remediated devices. Option C. Microsoft Defender for endpoint must classify the devices as Intune compliant. Option D. The sign-in session must obtain a refreshed token that is re-evaluated by conditional access. The correct answers are Option A. Microsoft Intune must re-evaluate and mark the devices as compliant, and Option D. The sign-in session must obtain a refreshed token that is re-evaluated by conditional access. Here's why. After Defender for endpoint clears the device risk, Intune must recalculate the device's compliant status. Access is restored when Microsoft Intra ID evaluates the updated compliance claim during a new or refreshed authentication token request. Why are the other options not correct? B. The existing conditional access policy can enforce the updated compliance state. A new policy is unnecessary. C. Defender for endpoint reports device risk. Intune evaluates and reports the resulting compliance state used by conditional access. Exam tip. Defender supplies device risk signals. Intune calculates compliance, and conditional access enforces the result during token evaluation. Question number 232. Scenario. An enterprise has integrated Microsoft Defender XDR, Microsoft Defender for Cloud, and Microsoft Sentinel. New Windows Server virtual machines will be deployed in Azure. The architecture must provide endpoint detection and response for the servers and automated orchestration for Sentinel incidents. Complete the security architecture. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Enable EDR protection for the Windows servers by the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are onboarding the servers to Microsoft Defender for Cloud, adding a Microsoft Intra ID data connector, adding a Defender for Cloud Apps data connector, or configuring Sentinel analytics rules. Statement 2. Implement Sentinel SOAR workflows by the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are configuring Defender for Cloud regulatory standards, configuring Microsoft Sentinel playbooks, onboarding the servers to Azure Arc, or configuring Defender for Cloud workflow automation. For Statement 1, the correct selection is onboarding the servers to Microsoft Defender for Cloud, enabling the applicable Defender for Servers plan provisions, integrated endpoint detection and response. For Statement 2, the correct selection is configuring Microsoft Sentinel playbooks. Playbooks automate investigation, notification, enrichment, and remediation actions. Exam tip. Defender for Servers supplies workload EDR. Sentinel playbooks provide automated cross-service response. Question number 233. Scenario. A hybrid organization collects operational and security events from Azure Arc-enabled servers in a perimeter network. The servers cannot connect directly to the public internet, but can reach an approved log analytics gateway. Security analysts require access to all workspace data. Operations personnel must be limited to logs associated with the server resources they administer. Which two controls should the architect include? Select 2. The available options are as follows. Option A. Microsoft intra-conditional access policies for individual log tables. Option B. Azure Monitor Agent configured to communicate through the approved gateway. Option C. Resource Context Azure RBAC for the operations personnel. Option D. A custom collector based on the retired log analytics agent. The correct answers are Option B. Azure Monitor Agent configured to communicate through the approved gateway, and Option C. Resource Context Azure or BAC for the operations personnel. Here's why. Azure Monitor Agent collects the required server events and can use an approved gateway architecture when direct outbound access is unavailable. Resource Context or BAC lets operations personnel query logs for resources they manage without granting workspace-wide access. Why are the other options not correct? A. Conditional access governs authentication conditions, but does not provide table or resource-level log authorization. D. The log analytics agent is retired and should not be selected for a new monitoring architecture. Exam tip. Use AMA for current log collection and resource context or granular table or BAC to separate operational access from SOC-wide visibility. Question number 234. Scenario. Your company is developing a serverless application in Azure. The architecture receives traffic from external clients via Azure API Management. API Management forwards requests to an Azure function, Patient API, which then communicates with another Azure function, Audit API, and a Mongo API database on Azure Cosmos DB. You need to recommend a solution to fully isolate the compute components, the Azure functions, on a dedicated Azure virtual network so that they are not accessible via shared public infrastructure. What should you include in the recommendation? The available options are as follows. Option A, Microsoft Intra ID, Azure AD, Enterprise Applications. Option B, an Azure App Service Environment, ASE. Option C, Azure Service Endpoints. Option D, Microsoft Intra ID, Azure AD, Application Proxy. The correct answer is option B, an Azure App Service Environment, ASE. Here's why. An Azure App Service Environment, ASE, provides a fully isolated and dedicated environment for securely running app service apps, Azure functions, and logic apps at high scale. By deploying the Azure functions into an ASE, the compute components are injected directly into your Azure virtual network with no shared public infrastructure. Note, Azure Functions Premium Plan with VNet integration is another modern alternative, but ASE provides the absolute highest level of dedicated isolation among the given choices. Why are the other options not correct? A. Intra-ID enterprise applications are used for identity and SSO, not network isolation of compute resources. C. Service endpoints secure inbound access to Azure PaaS services, but do not deploy compute components inside a VNet. D. App Proxy publishes on-premises web apps to external users securely. It does not isolate Azure functions. Exam tip. When strict network isolation and dedicated compute are required for web apps or serverless components, functions, an app service environment, ASE, is the architectural standard. Question number 235. Scenario. You have an Azure subscription that has Microsoft Defender for Cloud enabled. You are evaluating the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark, formerly Azure Security Benchmark v3, compliance report in the Defender for Cloud dashboard. You need to verify whether Microsoft Defender for Servers or a compatible endpoint detection and response solution is installed on all the virtual machines that run Windows. Which compliance control category should you evaluate? The available options are as follows. Option A, Asset Management. Option B, Posture and Vulnerability Management. Option C, Data Protection. Option D, Endpoint Security. Option E, Incident Response. The correct answer is option D, Endpoint Security. Here's why. In the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark, formerly Azure Security Benchmark, controls verifying the installation and health of endpoint detection and response, EDR, solutions, antivirus, and anti-malware, such as Microsoft Defender for Servers/Defender for Endpoint, fall under the Endpoint Security, ES, control category. Why are the other options not correct? A. Asset Management deals with inventory, resource tagging, and lifecycle management. B. Posture and Vulnerability Management deals with assessing misconfigurations and scanning for vulnerabilities, not the enforcement of the ED or agent deployment itself. C. Data Protection covers encryption at rest, encryption in transit, and data loss prevention. E. Incident Response covers preparation, detection, and mitigation workflows during a breach. Exam tip. Endpoint Security, ES, Benchmark controls ensure that workloads have EDR, anti-malware, and endpoint protection agents deployed and active. Question number 236. Scenario. An organization wants to review security posture across Microsoft 365 endpoints and Azure infrastructure. The environment contains Intune managed Windows 11 devices, Azure virtual machines, and Azure storage accounts. Select the primary posture management experience for each component. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Evaluate the security posture of the Windows 11 devices by using the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are Microsoft Defender XDR, Microsoft Defender for Cloud, Microsoft Sentinel, or Microsoft Purview. Statement 2. Evaluate the security posture of the Azure virtual machines by using the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are Microsoft Sentinel, Microsoft Defender XDR, Microsoft Defender for Cloud, or Microsoft Purview. Statement 3. Evaluate the security posture of the Azure storage accounts by using the blank. The choices for Statement 3 are Microsoft Purview, Microsoft Defender for Cloud, Microsoft Sentinel, or Microsoft Defender XDR. For Statement 1, the correct selection is Microsoft Defender XDR. Defender XDR and Defender Vulnerability Management expose endpoint weaknesses, recommendations, and device security posture. For Statement 2, the correct selection is Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Defender for Cloud assesses Azure compute resources against cloud security recommendations and standards. For Statement 3, the correct selection is Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Defender for Cloud identifies storage misconfigurations and contributes relevant recommendations to Cloud Secure Score. Exam tip. Use Microsoft Secure Score and Defender XD are for Microsoft 365 security posture. Use Defender for Cloud Secure Score for cloud infrastructure. Question number 237. Scenario. An organization federates access to its AWS environment through Microsoft Entra ID. It must strengthen privileged administration and protect Windows and Linux EC2 instances without installing the Azure Arc Connected Machine Agent. Which 3 Microsoft capabilities can be included in the design? Select 3. The available options are as follows. Option A. Azure policy assignments applied directly to AWS resources. Option B. Microsoft Entra conditional access for federated AWS sign-ins. Option C. Microsoft Defender for containers with full EKS runtime protection. Option D. Microsoft Entra privileged identity management. Option E. Microsoft Defender for servers through Direct Defender for endpoint onboarding. The correct answers are Option B. Microsoft Entra conditional access for federated AWS sign-ins. Option D. Microsoft Entra privileged identity management, and Option E, Microsoft Defender for servers through Direct Defender for endpoint onboarding. Here's why. Conditional access applies contextual controls to federated AWS authentication. PIM reduces standing privileged access. Defender for servers can protect supported multi-cloud servers through Direct Defender for endpoint onboarding without requiring the Azure Arc Connected Machine Agent. Why are the other options not correct? A. Azure policy cannot be assigned directly to native AWS resources as though they were Azure resources. C. Full Defender for containers runtime protection for EKS relies on Azure Arc-enabled Kubernetes and deployed Defender components. Exam tip. Microsoft Entra secures AWS access, while Defender for Cloud protects workloads. Verify whether each workload plan requires Azure Arc. Question number 238. Scenario. A manufacturer operates Azure IoT Edge devices and Amazon EC2 instances. The security team requires specialized IoT posture monitoring for the Edge devices and agentless multi-cloud posture assessment for the EC2 estate. Complete the multi-cloud posture management recommendation. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Assess and monitor the Azure IoT Edge devices by using the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, Microsoft Defender for IoT, Azure Arc, or Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. Statement 2. Assess the configuration posture of the AWS EC2 instances by using the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are Microsoft Defender for Endpoint only, Microsoft Defender for Cloud only, Azure Arc only, or Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps only? For Statement 1, the correct selection is Microsoft Defender for IoT. Defender for IoT provides specialized security visibility and recommendations for IoT and edge devices. For Statement 2, the correct selection is Microsoft Defender for Cloud only. Native multi-cloud CSPM discovers and evaluates AWS compute resources through the AWS connector. Exam tip: use Defender for IoT for specialized device security and Defender for Cloud for unified Azure, AWS, and GCP posture management. Question number 239. Scenario: a research organization must rapidly provide temporary personnel with access to applications hosted in its data center. The personnel will use unmanaged endpoints, but regulated data must remain within a centrally controlled Windows environment and must not be downloaded to the local devices. Capacity must scale as workers join and leave. Which architecture should the security team recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A: redesign the existing VPN by enabling split tunneling. Option B: migrate every private application to a public SaaS platform. Option C: deploy Azure Virtual Desktop with conditional access and cloud session data controls. Option D: enroll all personal endpoints in Microsoft Intune and permit direct application access. The correct answer is Option C: deploy Azure Virtual Desktop with conditional access and cloud session data controls. Here's why. Azure Virtual Desktop supplies centrally managed, scalable session hosts so applications and regulated data remain in the controlled environment. Conditional access verifies users and devices, while session and data controls reduce transfer to unmanaged endpoints. Why are the other options not correct? A: split tunneling does not isolate corporate data from unmanaged endpoints. B: migrating every application is unnecessary and does not address the immediate access requirement. D: enrolling personal devices conflicts with the stated unmanaged device model and permits direct local access. Exam tip: use a managed virtual desktop when temporary users need scalable access, but applications and data must remain in a controlled execution environment. Question number 240. Scenario: an enterprise is designing preventive network controls for its Azure landing zones. The controls must block malicious web requests and centrally restrict unauthorized network traffic before the activity reaches protected workloads. Which two Azure services should the architect recommend? Select 2. The available options are as follows. Option A: Microsoft Sentinel. Option B: Azure Firewall. Option C: Microsoft Defender for Cloud Security Alerts. Option D: Azure Web Application Firewall. Option E: Microsoft Intra-Privileged Identity Management. The correct answers are Option B, Azure Firewall, and Option D, Azure Web Application Firewall. Here's why. Azure Firewall applies centralized network and application-aware traffic filtering. Azure Web Application Firewall blocks malicious HTTP and HTTPS requests by using managed and custom rules. Both are preventive network controls. Why are the other options not correct? A: Microsoft Sentinel detects, investigates, and responds to threats, but does not directly block landing zone traffic. C: Defender for Cloud Alerts are detective signals. EPIM is a preventive privileged identity control, not a network traffic control. Exam tip: Azure Firewall protects broader network flows. WAF specializes in Layer 7 web application attacks. Question number 241. Scenario: a regulated Azure landing zone has 2 encryption requirements. The organization must control the key that protects payment data stored in Azure SQL. A claims processing application must provide an encryption key held in the organization's data center whenever it uploads a file to Azure Object Storage. Which 2 configurations satisfy the requirements? Select 2. The available options are as follows. Option A: protect the payment database with transparent data encryption that uses a customer-managed key in Azure Key Vault Managed HSM. Option B: encrypt the payment database by using only a Microsoft Managed Service key. Option C: Store the claims files in Azure files with a key held in Azure Key Vault Managed HSM. Option D. Upload the claims files to Azure Blob Storage by using customer-provided keys. The correct answers are Option A. Protect the payment database with transparent data encryption that uses a customer-managed key in Azure Key Vault Managed HSM, and Option D. Upload the claims files to Azure Blob Storage by using customer-provided keys. Here's why. A customer-managed TD protector in Managed HSM gives the organization control of the Azure SQL encryption key. Blob Storage customer-provided keys let the application supply its externally held encryption key with the storage request. Why are the other options not correct? B. A Microsoft-managed key does not satisfy the requirement for organization-controlled key management. C. A key in Azure Managed HSM is hosted in Azure rather than in the organization's data center, and Azure Files does not provide the requested per-request customer-provided key pattern. Exam tip. Customer-managed keys are retained by an Azure key store. Customer-provided keys are supplied with individual blob storage requests. Question number 242. Scenario. An organization must govern an Azure subscription against ISO 27001 controls. Existing resources that violate remediable configuration requirements must be brought into compliance automatically, and future deployments must be evaluated against the same standard. Which governance service should the architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A. Azure Role-Based Access Control. Option B. Microsoft Defender for Cloud Regulatory Compliance Dashboard. Option C. Azure Policy. Option D. Azure Blueprints. The correct answer is Option C, Azure Policy. Here's why. Azure Policy evaluates resources against initiatives such as ISO 27001 and supports preventive and corrective effects. Modify and deploy if not exist policies can use remediation tasks and managed identities to correct supported non-compliant configurations. Why are the other options not correct? A. Azure RBAC controls authorization rather than configuration compliance. B. The Regulatory Compliance Dashboard reports assessment results, but is not the underlying enforcement and remediation engine. D. Azure Blueprints is not the recommended current governance service for this requirement. Exam tip. Use Azure Policy for audit, deny, modify, deployment, and remediation. Use Defender for Cloud to prioritize and view security compliance findings. Question number 243. Scenario. A Microsoft 365 organization needs separate monitoring capabilities for identity compromise and anomalous SharePoint online activity. Map each Microsoft security capability to the activity it is best suited to monitor. Some source items will not be used. The available source items are as follows. Source item 1. Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. Source item 2. Microsoft Purview Data Loss Prevention. Source item 3. Microsoft Intra Conditional Access. Source item 4. Microsoft Intra ID Protection. Source item 5. Microsoft Defender for Cloud. The destination requirements are as follows. Destination A. Accounts that are likely to have been compromised. Destination B. Users performing anomalous bulk downloads from SharePoint Online. The first correct mapping is Microsoft Intra ID Protection, mapped to accounts that are likely to have been compromised. The second correct mapping is Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, mapped to users performing anomalous bulk downloads from SharePoint Online. Here's why. Identity protection generates user and sign-in risk detections for potentially compromised identities. Defender for Cloud Apps analyzes Microsoft 365 activity and identifies deviations such as unusual mass downloads. Exam tip. Use Identity Protection for identity risk and Defender for Cloud Apps for behavioral monitoring inside SaaS services. Question number 244. Scenario. Microsoft Defender for Cloud identifies several storage accounts that permit public network access, lack appropriate virtual network restrictions, and do not use private endpoints. The organization wants a governance control that can audit these configurations, deny non-compliant deployments, and deploy supported configurations automatically. Which service should the architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A. Microsoft Sentinel. Option B, Azure Storage Analytics. Option C, Azure Policy. Option D, Azure Network Watcher. The correct answer is option C, Azure Policy. Here's why. Azure Policy can assess storage network configurations and use effects such as audit, deny, modify, and deploy if not exists to govern public access, firewall rules, virtual network restrictions, and supported private endpoint configurations. Why are the other options not correct? A. Microsoft Sentinel analyzes security telemetry but does not enforce storage resource configurations. B. Storage Analytics supplies storage logging and metrics. D. Network Watcher provides network diagnostics and visibility rather than configuration governance. Exam tip. Defender for Cloud Surfaces Storage Recommendations. Azure Policy provides the assessment and enforcement mechanism behind many recommendations. Question number 245. Scenario. You receive a high-severity security alert in Microsoft Defender for Cloud indicating that the microburst exploitation toolkit was used to extract keys to your storage accounts. The alert details show that REST APIs were used to list and capture the storage account access keys. After remediating the immediate threat and rotating the exposed keys, you need to assign an Azure Policy definition to prevent this specific extraction threat from reoccurring across your storage accounts. Which policy definition should you assign? The available options are as follows. Option A. Storage account public access should be disallowed. Option B. Azure Key Vault Managed HSM should have purge protection enabled. Option C. Storage accounts should prevent shared key access. Option D. Storage account keys should not be expired. The correct answer is option C. Storage accounts should prevent shared key access. Here's why. The alert states that attackers are using REST APIs to extract storage account access keys. The most effective architectural defense against access key theft and misuse is to disable shared key authorization entirely on the storage account. Doing so forces all clients to use Microsoft Entra ID, Azure AD, or BAC for authentication, rendering stolen access keys useless and preventing REST API calls from successfully retrieving them. Why are the other options not correct? A. Disallowing public access blocks internet traffic, but an attacker operating from an allowed VNet could still extract and use shared keys if they are enabled. B. Purge protection prevents permanent deletion of key vault secrets. It does not prevent the extraction of native storage account access keys. D. Storage account keys do not naturally expire, like certificates, and preventing expiration would do nothing to stop an attacker from stealing them. Exam tip. To enforce modern zero-trust identity controls on Azure storage and mitigate access key theft, assign Azure Policy to prevent shared key access. Question number 246. Scenario. A company manages 50 Azure subscriptions. All subscriptions must be assessed against a centrally maintained ISO 27001 policy set. Administrators must be able to change the collection of policy definitions without editing separate individual policy assignments. Which two assignment approaches meet the requirement? Select two. The available options are as follows. Option A. Assign each individual policy definition to the management group. Option B. Assign the ISO 27001 initiative to every subscription. Option C. Assign an Azure blueprint to every subscription. Option D. Assign the ISO 27001 initiative to the parent management group. Option E. Assign one individual policy definition to every subscription. Option F. Assign an Azure blueprint to the parent management group. The correct answers are Option B. Assign the ISO 27001 initiative to every subscription, and Option D. Assign the ISO 27001 initiative to the parent management group. Here's why. An initiative groups the complete set of ISO policy definitions under one maintained object. It can be assigned separately to each subscription or inherited by all subscriptions from a management group assignment. Why are the other options not correct? A. Assigning individual definitions requires separate assignment and maintenance. C. Azure Blueprints is not the recommended current solution for new governance deployments. E. One policy definition cannot represent the complete ISO standard. F. Azure Blueprint assignments are not made to management groups in the same way as Azure policy assignments. Exam tip. Use initiatives to maintain groups of related policies and management group scope to provide inherited governance across subscriptions. Question number 247. Scenario. You open the recommendations page in Microsoft Defender for Cloud to evaluate controls that directly affect your secure score. You need to identify the exact resources required to remediate specific security controls and maximize your secure score. Select the correct answer choice that completes each statement to increase the score for the respective security controls. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. To increase the score for the Restrict Unauthorized Network Access control, implement the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are Network Security Groups, NSGS, Microsoft Intra-Conditional Access Policies, or Azure Web Application Firewall, WAF. Statement 2. To increase the score for the Enable Endpoint Protection control, implement the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are Microsoft Defender for Servers, Microsoft Defender for Resource Manager, or Private Endpoints. For Statement 1, the correct selection is Network Security Groups, NSGS. For Statement 2, the correct selection is Microsoft Defender for Servers. Here is the overall reasoning. To increase the score for Restrict Unauthorized Network Access, you must ensure that management ports and internal subnets are protected by Network Security Groups, NSGS, or Azure Firewall. To increase the score for Enable Endpoint Protection, you must deploy an endpoint protection solution such as Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, which is provisioned via the Microsoft Defender for Servers plan and Defender for Cloud. Exam tip. Defender for Cloud evaluates basic network isolation via NSG assignments and evaluates endpoint security via the presence of Defender for Servers or compatible EDR on virtual machines. Question number 248. Scenario. An architect is reviewing the current Microsoft Defender for Cloud controls related to exposed virtual machine management ports. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Enabling the deprecated adaptive network hardening feature is a supported current method for increasing the secure management port score. Statement 1. Enabling the deprecated adaptive network hardening feature is a supported current method for increasing the secure management port score. The answer is no. The feature and its related recommendation were deprecated, so architects should use current management port protections instead. Exam tip. Validate whether older Defender for Cloud recommendations remain supported before using them in a current architecture. Question number 249. Scenario. An Azure subscription contains virtual machines whose RDP and SSH management ports remain continuously reachable. Defender for Cloud reports a low score for controls that protect management access. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Enabling just-in-time virtual machine access can improve compliance with the secure management ports control. Statement 1. Enabling just-in-time virtual machine access can improve compliance with the secure management ports control. The answer is yes. JIT limits how long management ports are reachable and removes persistent inbound exposure. Exam tip. Use JIT to reduce exposure of RDP and SSH. Use Azure Bastion when administrators need managed browser-based access without public VM addresses. Question number 253. Scenario. An organization hosts different applications on Windows Server virtual machines. Its application allow listing standard requires unapproved executables, scripts, installers, and drivers to be blocked rather than merely reported. Which control should the security architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A, App Discovery Anomaly Policies in Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. Option B, App Control for Business Policies configured in enforced mode. Option C, Microsoft Intune App Protection Policies. Option D, Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark Compliance Assessments. The correct answer is Option B, App Control for Business policies configured in enforced mode. Here's why. App Control for Business implements an application allow list model on supported Windows systems. Enforced policies block executables, scripts, installers, and drivers that do not satisfy the organization's trust rules. Why are the other options not correct? A. Cloud apps anomaly policies monitor SaaS behavior and do not control code execution on servers. C. Intune app protection policies protect organizational data in supported client applications. D. Benchmark assessments identify posture gaps, but do not enforce an executable allow list. Exam tip. Use App Control for Business to determine which code may execute. Use Defender for Endpoint to detect and investigate endpoint threats. Question number 255. Scenario. An organization operates Windows, macOS, iOS, and Android devices. Windows systems are located both in Azure and in corporate data centers. Security architects must define cross-platform compliance rules, evaluate device state, and make the results available for access decisions. Which Microsoft service should the architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A, Microsoft Sentinel. Option B, Microsoft Purview Information Protection. Option C, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Option D, Microsoft Intune. The correct answer is option D, Microsoft Intune. Here's why. Microsoft Intune provides cross-platform device compliance policies for Windows, macOS, iOS, and Android. It evaluates device state and shares compliance results with Microsoft intra-conditional access. Why are the other options not correct? A. Sentinel is a SIEM and SOAR platform. B. Information protection classifies and protects data rather than assessing device compliance. C. Defender for Endpoint supplies endpoint risk and threat signals, but does not replace Intune's cross-platform compliance policy engine. Exam tip. Intune determines device compliance. Defender for Endpoint contributes device risk signals. Conditional access enforces the resulting access decision. Question number 256. Scenario. A security architect is reviewing Defender for Cloud recommendations for Azure virtual machines whose RDP and SSH ports remain continuously accessible from the Internet. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Onboarding the virtual machines to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint without changing their network exposure will remediate the management port exposure. Statement 1. Onboarding the virtual machines to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint without changing their network exposure will remediate the management port exposure. The answer is no. Management port exposure must be reduced through network restrictions, just-in-time access, Azure Bastion, or another access control design. Exam tip. Endpoint protection does not replace network controls for exposed administrative ports. Question number 257. Scenario. A defense supplier must assess an Azure subscription against NIST SP-800-53 Rev 5 before deploying a workload for a United States government agency. Microsoft Defender for Cloud is already enabled. What should the security architect configure first? The available options are as follows. Option A. Connect Defender for Cloud alerts to Microsoft Sentinel. Option B. Add the NIST SP-800-53 regulatory compliance standard to the subscription. Option C. Review only the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark recommendations. Option D. Create a Defender for Cloud Apps Access policy. The correct answer is option B. Add the NIST SP-800-53 regulatory compliance standard to the subscription. Here's why. Defender for Cloud regulatory compliance evaluates resources against assigned standards. The applicable NIST SP-800-53 initiative must be assigned before the subscription can be assessed against its controls. Why are the other options not correct? A. The Sentinel connector forwards security data but does not enable NIST assessment. C. The Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark is not a substitute for the requested NIST standard. D. Defender for Cloud Apps policies govern SaaS activity and access rather than Azure regulatory compliance. Exam tip. Assign the required regulatory standard first. Defender for Cloud then displays the resulting compliance assessments. Question number 258. Scenario. An organization downloads Microsoft recommended group policy security baselines for Windows clients and servers. Before deployment, administrators must compare the baseline settings with the policies and registry settings currently applied to representative devices. Which Microsoft Security Compliance Toolkit utility should the architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A, Local Group Policy Object Utility. Option B, Policy Analyzer. Option C, Windows Autopilot. Option D, Microsoft Intune. The correct answer is option B, Policy Analyzer. Here's why. Policy Analyzer compares sets of group policy objects with Microsoft security baselines, local policy, and registry settings. It highlights differences, conflicts, and redundant configuration values. Why are the other options not correct? A. LGPO imports, exports, and applies local group policy settings, but is not the primary comparison utility. C. Windows Autopilot provisions Windows devices. D. Intune deploys and assesses managed device policies, but is not the Security Compliance Toolkit utility requested. Exam tip. Use Policy Analyzer to compare policies. Use LGPO to import, export, or apply local policy settings. Question number 259. A security operations team uses Microsoft Sentinel and Microsoft Defender for Cloud. During an investigation, analysts need a code-based, Jupyter, environment for advanced, programmable analysis of collected security events. Additionally, they need to access detailed, Microsoft-authored threat intelligence narratives and context associated directly with specific Defender for Cloud alerts. Which two capabilities should the security architect recommend? Select 2. The available options are as follows. Option A, Microsoft Sentinel Threat Intelligence Workbooks. Option B, Microsoft Defender for Cloud Workload Protections Dashboard. Option C, Microsoft Sentinel Notebooks. Option D, Microsoft Defender for Cloud Threat Intelligence Reports. The correct answers are Option C, Microsoft Sentinel Notebooks, and Option D, Microsoft Defender for Cloud Threat Intelligence Reports. Here's why. Sentinel Notebooks provide a Jupyter-based, code-driven environment for programmable investigation, data analysis, and enrichment. Defender for Cloud Threat Intelligence Reports provide Microsoft-authored context and narratives about threats associated directly with supported security alerts. Why are the other options not correct? A. Threat intelligence workbooks visualize imported threat indicators and trends, but are not a programmable investigation environment. B. The Workload Protections Dashboard summarizes workloads and alerts, but does not provide code-based analysis or the in-depth Microsoft threat narrative reports. Exam tip. Use notebooks for code-based, Python/Jupyter, investigations, and threat intelligence reports for Microsoft-authored alert narratives. Question number 260. Scenario. A retailer operates multiple Azure Kubernetes service clusters across several subscriptions. Defender for Cloud discovers the clusters, but Kubernetes workload configuration findings and related secure score recommendations are missing. Which two actions should the architect recommend? Select 2. The available options are as follows. Option A, configure Defender for Cloud Workflow Automation. Option B, enable the Microsoft Defender for Containers plan. Option C, assign an unrelated regulatory compliance initiative. Option D, enable automatic provisioning of the required Kubernetes security components. Option E, review the cloud asset inventory without changing the protection configuration. The correct answers are Option B, enable the Microsoft Defender for Containers plan, and Option D, enable automatic provisioning of the required Kubernetes security components. Here's why. Defender for Containers provides AKS posture assessment, vulnerability findings, and runtime protection. Automatic provisioning deploys required components, such as Azure policy for Kubernetes, so Defender for Cloud can generate workload configuration recommendations. Why are the other options not correct? A. Workflow automation responds to findings, but does not create missing assessments. C. An unrelated compliance initiative does not deploy the required Defender components. E. Inventory review confirms resource discovery, but does not enable posture recommendations. Exam tip. Enable the workload protection plan and its required provisioning components when expected recommendations are missing. Question number 261. Scenario. A company hosts administrative virtual machines in 2 Azure virtual networks in the same region. External developers must connect through the Azure portal by using browser-based TLS sessions. The design must avoid public IP addresses on the virtual machines, require no VPN client, and minimize the number of Azure Bastion deployments. Which 2 actions should the architect recommend? Select 2. The available options are as follows. Option A. Enable just-in-time access while retaining public IP addresses on the virtual machines. Option B. Deploy 1 Azure Bastion resource in a shared hub virtual network. Option C. Peer both workload virtual networks with a shared hub virtual network. Option D. Deploy a separate Azure Bastion resource in every workload virtual network. Option E. Publish the management ports through Azure Firewall Destination NAT rules. The correct answers are Option B. Deploy 1 Azure Bastion resource in a shared hub virtual network, and Option C. Peer both workload virtual networks with a shared hub virtual network. Here's why. Azure Bastion provides browser-based RDP and SSH without public IP addresses, or AVPN. A supported Bastion deployment can connect to virtual machines in peered virtual networks, allowing one shared deployment to serve both workload networks. Why are the other options not correct? A. JIT does not remove the public connectivity requirement in this design. D. Separate Bastion deployments increase cost unnecessarily. E. Firewall NAT rules expose management paths through public endpoints and do not provide the required portal-based Bastion experience. Exam tip. A shared Bastion deployment can serve peered virtual networks when the selected architecture and SKU support the connection method. Question number 262. Scenario. An Azure Automation Runbook copies files to Azure Data Lake Storage Generation 2. The architecture must use the modern, recommended approach to authorize access without managing or storing credential keys. Additionally, it must prevent the storage data endpoint from being exposed through the public internet. Complete the security recommendation. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Authorize storage access by using the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are a system-assigned managed identity, a storage account access key, the automation contributor role, or an Azure Monitor workbook. Statement 2. Restrict connectivity to the storage data endpoint by using the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are Azure Web Application Firewall rules, Azure Private Link and Storage Network controls, the automation contributor role, or a Microsoft Sentinel data connector. For Statement 1, the correct selection is a system-assigned managed identity. Managed identities remove the need to handle legacy access keys or store secrets. For Statement 2, the correct selection is Azure Private Link and Storage Network controls. Private endpoints and storage firewall settings keep the data path strictly on approved private networks. Exam tip. Always prefer managed identities over access keys or stored credentials for Azure service-to-service authentication. Question number 263. Scenario. A company licenses its Windows 11 endpoints with Microsoft 365 E5. Corporate devices must be prevented from accessing website categories such as gambling and adult content. Which security capability should the architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A. Microsoft Purview Compliance Manager. Option B. Microsoft Intune Enrollment Restrictions. Option C. Microsoft Defender for Endpoint Web Content Filtering. Option D. Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps Application Discovery. The correct answer is Option C. Microsoft Defender for Endpoint Web Content Filtering. Here's why. Web content filtering in Defender for Endpoint can block website categories such as gambling and other adult content categories on supported managed devices. Why are the other options not correct? A. Compliance Manager assesses regulatory controls. B. Intune enrollment restrictions govern device enrollment rather than website categories. D. Defender for Cloud Apps governs cloud applications and SaaS activity, but is not the endpoint category filtering control requested. Exam tip. Use Defender for endpoint web content filtering for category-based website restrictions on supported endpoints. Question number 264. Scenario. A transportation company will deploy Windows kiosks that already use an assigned access profile to expose only approved applications. The organization now needs centralized endpoint management, threat detection, and continuous recommendations for hardening the kiosks against newly discovered weaknesses. Which two actions should the architect recommend? Select 2. The available options are as follows. Option A. Onboard the kiosks to Azure Monitor only. Option B. Integrate the kiosks with Microsoft Intune and Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Option C. Designate every kiosk as a privileged access workstation. Option D. Enable threat and vulnerability management in Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Option E. Use automated investigation and remediation as the application allow listing mechanism. The correct answers are Option A. Configure Windows Defender Application Control, App Control for Business, and Option B. Integrate the kiosks with Microsoft Intune and Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Here's why. Windows Defender Application Control, App Control for Business, provides the primary allow listing mechanism to restrict executable applications. Intune centrally manages the kiosk configurations, while Defender for Endpoint provides threat detection and continuous vulnerability management. Why are the other options not correct? C. A kiosk is not a privileged access workstation, PAW, which is reserved for high-privilege administrators. D. Azure Monitor collects telemetry but does not manage endpoint policies or provide vulnerability scanning. E. Automated investigation and remediation, AIR, responds to active threats but does not function as an application allow listing control. Exam tip. Use App Control for Business for strict application execution allow listing. Question number 265. Scenario. An organization must automatically place a visible watermark on supported Microsoft Office documents when a sensitivity label identifies the documents as confidential. The visual marking must remain when users attach the labeled documents to email. Which Microsoft capability should the Data Security Architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A. Microsoft Purview Insider Risk Management. Option B. Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. Option C. Microsoft Purview Information Protection. Option D. Microsoft Purview Data Map. The correct answer is Option C. Microsoft Purview Information Protection. Here's why. Purview Information Protection sensitivity labels can classify supported Office documents and apply visual markings such as headers, footers, and watermarks. The marking remains part of the labeled document when it is attached to email. Why are the other options not correct? A. Insider Risk Management detects risky user behavior. B. Defender for Cloud Apps governs cloud application activity and sessions. D. Purview Data Map discovers and catalogs data, but does not apply Office document watermarks. Exam tip. Use sensitivity labels for persistent document classification, encryption, and visual markings. Question number 266. Scenario. Your company has a hybrid cloud infrastructure. Data and applications are moved regularly between an on-premises network and Azure. The on-premises network contains both Windows Server and Linux Server machines. You are designing security operations to support the hybrid cloud infrastructure. The solution must meet the following requirements: govern virtual machines and physical servers consistently across both environments. Enforce and operating system standards and configurations for all resources across all environments by using Azure policy. Which two components should you recommend integrating for the on-premises network? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Select exactly two answers. The available options are as follows. Option A. An on-premises data gateway. Option B. Azure VPN gateway. Option C. Azure policy machine configuration, guest configuration. Option D. Azure Arc. Option E. Azure Bastion. The correct answers are Option C. Azure policy machine configuration, guest configuration, and Option D. Azure Arc. Here's why. Azure Arc enables you to onboard and manage on-premises Windows and Linux servers as if they were native Azure resources. Once onboarded, Azure Policy Machine Configuration, formerly Guest Configuration, can audit and enforce in operating system settings, such as password policies or installed software, across both Azure Virtual Machines and Azure Arc-enabled on-premises servers. Why are the other options not correct? A. An on-premises data gateway bridges data transfer between on-prem data sources, like SQL, and Azure Cloud Services, like Power BI or Logic Apps, not for OS governance. B. Azure VPN Gateway provides network connectivity, but does not provide governance or OS configuration capabilities. E. Azure Bastion provides secure or DPSSH access to Azure virtual machines without public IPs, not OS-level policy enforcement. Exam tip. Combine Azure Arc for control plane projection with Azure Policy Machine Configuration to govern OS-level settings consistently across hybrid environments. Question number 267. Scenario. A customer uses Azure to develop a mobile application that will be consumed exclusively by external users. The application connects to an Azure App Service and an Azure Bot Service backend. You need to design an identity strategy for the app. The solution must meet the following requirements. Enable the usage of external social IDs such as Google, Facebook, and Microsoft accounts. Use a dedicated customer identity store separated from the corporate workforce directory. Support fully customizable branding for the application's authentication experience. Which modern Microsoft service should you recommend to complete the design? The available options are as follows. Option A, Microsoft Intra B2B Collaboration. Option B, Microsoft Intra-Domain Services, Azure ADDS. Option C, Microsoft Intra-External ID for Customers, CIM. Option D, Microsoft Intra-Connect. The correct answer is option C, Microsoft Intra-External ID for Customers, CIM. Here's why. Microsoft Intra-External ID for Customers, formerly Azure ADB2C, is Microsoft's Customer Identity and Access Management, CIM, solution. It is specifically designed for consumer-facing apps, allowing external users to authenticate using social IDs, Google, Facebook, or local accounts, while keeping the identity store completely separate from the corporate workforce directory and supporting fully customizable branding. Why are the other options not correct? A. Microsoft Intra B2B is meant for business partners collaborating on corporate resources in the workforce tenant, not for consumer-facing mobile apps using social identities. B. Azure AD Domain Services provides legacy LDAP, NTLM, and Kerberos authentication for virtual machines, not modern OAuth/OIDC customer identity. D. Azure AD Connect synchronizes on-premises Active Directory to Intra ID. It is not a CIM solution. Exam tip. For consumer-facing applications requiring social login, custom branding, and a separate directory, use Microsoft Intra-External ID for Customers, CIM. Question number 268. Scenario. A hybrid enterprise needs a central platform for collecting security telemetry from Azure, Microsoft 365, on-premises systems, and third-party services. Analysts must correlate alerts, investigate incidents, query audit records, and perform proactive threat hunting. Which service should the architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A, Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. Option B, Microsoft Defender XDR. Option C, Microsoft Sentinel. Option D, Microsoft Defender for Cloud. The correct answer is option C, Microsoft Sentinel. Here's why. Microsoft Sentinel is a cloud-native SIEM and SOAR platform for centralized log collection, correlation, incident management, investigation, auditing, automation, and threat hunting across hybrid and multi-cloud environments. Why are the other options not correct? A. Defender for Cloud Apps focuses on SaaS discovery, monitoring, and governance. B. Defender XDR correlates detections across supported Defender products, but is not the broad enterprise SIEM for all data sources. D. Defender for Cloud provides cloud posture and workload protection rather than general-purpose SIEM capabilities. Exam tip. Choose Sentinel when the requirement combines broad log ingestion, SIEM analytics, hunting, and SOAR. Question number 269. Scenario. An organization uses Windows, Mac OS, Android, and iOS devices and stores Microsoft Office documents across Microsoft 365, Azure, and on-premises repositories. Sensitive documents must be classified and protected with persistent encryption wherever they are stored or shared. Which Microsoft solution should the architect recommend? The available options are as follows. Option A, Microsoft Purview eDiscovery. Option B, Microsoft Purview Information Protection. Option C, Microsoft Purview Compliance Manager. Option D, Microsoft Purview Retention Policies. The correct answer is option B, Microsoft Purview Information Protection. Here's why. Purview Information Protection discovers, classifies, labels, and protects sensitive information. Label-based encryption can remain with supported documents as they move between cloud, endpoint, and on-premises locations. Why are the other options not correct? A. eDiscovery supports legal preservation, search, review, and export. C. Compliance Manager assesses regulatory controls and improvement actions. D. Retention policies govern content retention and deletion rather than persistent classification and encryption. Exam tip. Use information protection for persistent labels and encryption. Use retention for lifecycle governance. Question number 270. Scenario. A company publishes Azure App Service applications through Azure Front Door. Direct access to the app service origins must be blocked so that all supported requests traverse Front Door. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Allowing requests from a single presumed front door backend IP address is sufficient to ensure that the applications can be reached only through Azure Front Door. Statement 1. Allowing requests from a single presumed front door backend IP address is sufficient to ensure that the applications can be reached only through Azure Front Door. The answer is no. The origin should use the Azure Front Door backend service tag and validate the profile-specific front door identifier. Exam tip. Do not build front door origin restrictions around a single assumed backend IP address. Question number 271. Scenario. A financial institution stores personally identifiable information in Azure storage and Azure databases. The security architecture must scan the Azure data estate to discover and classify sensitive information and must prioritize cloud security alerts involving resources that contain sensitive data. Complete the recommendation. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Register and scan the Azure data sources by using the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, Microsoft Purview Data Map, Endpoint Data Loss Prevention, or Microsoft Sentinel. Statement 2. Investigate security findings involving the sensitive Azure resources by using the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are Microsoft Defender for Cloud, Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, Endpoint Data Loss Prevention, or Azure Monitor Metrics. For Statement 1, the correct selection is Microsoft Purview Data Map. Data Map provides data source registration, scanning, classification, and cataloging across the Azure data estate. For Statement 2, the correct selection is Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Defender for Cloud provides cloud posture, workload alerts, and data-aware resource risk context. Exam tip. Use Purview to understand the data and Defender for Cloud to assess and protect the Azure resources that host it. Question number 272. Scenario. Defender for Cloud reports that several Azure virtual machines have unnecessarily exposed administrative ports. The architect is evaluating possible remediations. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Installing the VM Access extension on the virtual machines will restrict the network exposure of their RDP and SSH ports. Statement 1. Installing the VM Access extension on the virtual machines will restrict the network exposure of their RDP and SSH ports. The answer is no. Port exposure must be controlled through NSGS, JIT access, Azure Bastion, firewalls, or equivalent network controls. Exam tip. A virtual machine extension is not a substitute for management plane network segmentation. You have completed Part 7 of the SC-100 practice series. Continue your preparation by opening the complete playlist and watching the remaining parts in sequence. Please like this video, subscribe to Tech with Kaushik, and enable notifications for more certification exam preparation content. Share your score, questions, or feedback in the comments. Thank you for watching. See you in the next part.